Hi everyone, and welcome to our first session of day 3 of CALC 25. And I'd like to welcome Sae Matsuno and Alice Corble. Sae's going to be delivering the presentation. Alice is helping out to moderate and to do questions and answers. So I'll hand it over to you, Sae. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Darren. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Sae Matsuno. I'm an East Asian-born, UK, London-based academic librarian who recently graduated from the Library and Information Studies program at University College London, UCL. So today, with the support from Alice Corble, I'm going to speak to you about my master's thesis. As the subtitle of this presentation shows, I researched the history of British librarianship to highlight the anti-racist activism of UK-based librarians of colour during the 1970s and 1980s. My presentation will take about half an hour to outline what this research is about and how it was conducted. And then as we'll move on to Q&A, Alice will ask me some questions to start our conversation. And the remaining time of the session hopefully will be used for the audience to ask their questions. All right? Alice, to be able to show the next slide. Thank you. So as a master's level dissertation project, this research is quite unusual in that I had 6 years of time available to develop my research questions. This process felt very much like digging a well or growing a tree. I was admitted to UCL in 2018 and got quite shocked by the predominantly white environment of librarianship. This situation is commonly summarized as 97% white in the UK sector. So I felt disempowered for some time, but then started to connect with librarian colleagues from UK ethnic minority backgrounds. I attended decolonization related events and later co-organized events myself. And Alice is going to put a link in the chat. So this is one of the events I co-organized with my supervisor, Alison Hicks, and collaborating with Marilyn Clark and other UK archivists.
Wonderful.
And
So that link is coming. 1 minute.
yeah, okay.
You carry on and I'll add it.
Yeah. Oh, right. Right. That's all right. Yeah. So along the way, came to me this question, who had been here before us, the past generations of UK-based librarians from ethnic minority backgrounds. And at first, I couldn't find any of their names. I couldn't find where they were from, where they worked, or what work they delivered. It was really hard to find information. So I started to use the research skills that I built before becoming a librarian. Previously, I was an art historian who spent a significant amount of time in archives, museums, special collection reading rooms, etc. And by using these research skills, I knew that I would be able to collect evidence, to connect dots, put pieces together, and craft a historical narrative, which I thought was missing in the library sector. Alice, can you go to the next slide? Throughout my time at UCL, I was encouraged and supported by various people. My special thanks go to colleagues Marilyn Clark, Alison Hicks, Alice Corble, and Nena Oriechuku. Additionally, my research approach has greatly been inspired by the following two UK-based multidisciplinary artists, Alberta Whittle and Rohan Einde, each of whom creates amazing, strikingly immersive installation space where the audience are deeply engaged with the idea and practice of radical Black imagination. For those who are interested, here are some links to learn more about Alberta and Rohan's artworks. So Alice, could you put some links there? Yeah. Okay. I think Rohan's work is already there. I'm adding, yeah, that's Rohan's work, Alberta's work. Yeah, okay, I'm going to just carry on. Alberta and Rohan provided me with an anchor, and I really needed to hold on to this anchor because the research and writing process I went through was difficult due to the highly offensive racist and sexist images, as well as texts that emerged from my primary literature search. Can you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. So during today's session, I am not going to directly show these offensive materials or do not intend to delve into the details of my findings and analysis, as I feel 1 hour is not sufficient for me to share the complex historical context that I investigated in the dissertation. Instead, again, for those who are interested, I'm sharing a part of my dissertation as an open access document with Creative Commons license. And there you can read as well as download and distribute my table of contents, introduction, and conclusion. Yeah, dissertation except link. I'm also putting the direct address in here because when saved, the text document is not going to show the link itself. Okay, so that's good. So that's the excerpt from my dissertation. And as my content notes state, I am aware that each of us here needs to take care of ourselves. So some of you may find my topic challenging. And if that is the case, I encourage you to take necessary steps to ensure your safety. I'd also like to say a few things about my terminology. The terminology to collectively categorize British-based individuals with non-white identities has a long, contentious history, as many of you know. So I spent quite a lot of time thinking about these issues so that I could find my middle ground. In my dissertation, my usage of terms is based on the work of the British Ugandan sociologist Abda Bra, as well as a public librarian, Tracy Hilton, who wrote the master's thesis in the early 1990s. I've decided to follow Hilton and capitalize the first letter of Black to highlight the political nature of the term and use the term Black to only describe people of African and African Caribbean descent. And in resonance with Bra, I use the term people of color or librarians of color to connote the efforts of non-white ethnicities to build solidarity, at the same time as acknowledging the problematic history of the word colored being used as a racialized term in Britain. Okay, let's next slide, please. Thank you. In my dissertation, what I primarily tried to do was to foreground the forgotten work of librarians of color who were active in Britain during the 1970s and 1980s. I mainly focused on 3 community librarians, Anne Thompson, Jasvinder Gandhara, and Ziggy Alexander. In the UK library context, community librarianship refers to the work of public libraries relating to their social justice focused services, and if more narrowly defined, the term refers to the services implemented between the 1970s and the mid-1980s for groups of populations who would otherwise have found it difficult to access library resources. These groups include, for example, the economically deprived, ethnic and sexual minorities, and the disabled. In my research, I found out that Anne was a Trinidadian-born community librarian who started her career in 1971 in London. Jasvinder was also a London-based community librarian, a woman with Indian heritage whose family roots were in Kenya. Ziggy was a Dominican-born librarian, and Ziggy and Jasvinder worked in the same public library services, London Borough of Brent. Next slide, please. Beautiful photo, isn't it? So why has it been that the details of Anne, Jasvinder, and Ziggy's work are not widely known in the history of British librarianship? Jasvinder and Ziggy's names do appear in the reference lists of some library publications, as they were more eager to publish their texts. But Anne Thompson, it was very challenging to trace her activities. Then I found this article with this rare portrait photograph and looking at the camera as if interacting with library users. This photo illustrates her racism, libraries and book selection article in the Dragon's Teeth magazine. Dragon's Teeth was published by the National Committee on Racism in Children's Books from 1979 to 1992. The magazine advocated for anti-racism and multiculturalism in children's books, and it attracted a range of contributors, including librarians, educators, writers, activists, community workers, many of whom seem to have been people of color. When I read Anne's article and I saw this photo, that was for me the defining moment. It was clear that main research focus will be on this brave, brilliant Black public librarian, as well as the Dragon's Teeth magazine itself, to which all 3 women, Anne, Jasvinder, and Ziggy, contributed. So my dissertation starts with a description of Anne's portrait, and whilst writing, I came back to my introduction text again and again whenever I felt stuck, so that I could remind myself of how significant Anne's presence was in the history of British librarianship. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, where were my main sites of research? Being a UCL student gave me a privilege of fully utilizing the resources available at both UCL libraries and the British Library. UCL has a complete run of Dragon's Teeth, At the British Library, I was also able to study the periodicals that cover the time period 1960s to 1980s, the decades that were important for my research. Next slide, please. In terms of our archival research, I was able to find rich materials again at UCL. Marina Foster was a South African-born educator who was one of the key persons to publish Dragon's Teeth. Jagdish Gandhara was a professor at Institute of Education who was also an older brother of Jasvinder Gandhara. Marina kept her documents relating to Dragon's Teeth starting from 1978 to 1985, and with Anne Thompson's contribution to Dragon's Teeth spanning from 1978 to 1984, Marina's archive had the perfect coverage of Anne's time in the Dragon's Teeth editorial team. Jagdish's archive contains hard-to-find small publications written by Jasvinder, which of course immensely helped me to make progress in my research. Outside of UCL, I visited George Patmore Institute several times. This is a very well-known Black British activism-focused community archive where I found some interesting documents relating to Anne Thompson. And lastly, National Museums Liverpool recently opened a very important archive relating to Dorothy Kuya, community worker and activist with English and West African heritage. Dorothy was the instigator of Dragon's Teeth. Due to the time constraints, I wasn't able to visit Kuya archive, but I obtained a detailed catalog spreadsheet that provided me with some additional information to better understand the origin of Dragon's Teeth. Next slide, please. Thank you. The archival materials used in the dissertations are meeting minutes, letters, and handwritten notes, as well as ephemera, including pamphlets, posters, and book fair participation forms. Throughout my research, one slide back, please, Alice. Yes, throughout my research, no worries. Throughout my research, I repeatedly confirmed the relevance and validity of archivist researcher Hannah Ishmael's argument on the importance of Black-led archives, as well as the power of ephemeral materials to tell stories that are different from the mainstream narratives. I also recommend Hannah Ishmael. She's a great scholar on critical archival studies. Her dissertation is also an open access document on UCL's institutional repository. Yes, next one, please. The materials I found in the periodicals and archives helped me to establish a very complex constellation within the history of British librarianship, where Abda Bra's concept of diaspora space provided me with an important framework. And with this framework, I was able to link differentiated lives of librarians across sectors, ethnicities, and generations. Bra is known for her influential research in diaspora studies. And Marilyn Clark first told me about her research, and I'm so forever grateful to her. She was born in Punjab and moved to Uganda as a child. Her life itself is a diasporic journey. She was deeply influenced by the civil rights movement whilst studying in the United States, gained citizenship in the UK after becoming stateless as a result of the expulsion of Asians from Uganda. And after that, she built her career in education and research in the UK. Bra was also a founding member of Southall Black Sisters. That's a London-based feminist campaign group. And through her feminist research into migration, settlement, and globalization, Bra developed this idea of diaspora space, where histories and discourses, as well as memories, experiences, and identities of migrants and their descendants become socially, politically, economically, culturally, it goes on, and psychologically intertwined among themselves, as well as entangled with those of people who have stayed put. So I learned from her books that in contemporary scholarship of diaspora, this term diaspora, broadly encompasses the migration and resettlement of people all over the world, including migrants, immigrants, expats, refugees, guest workers, or exiles. The concept of diaspora space is then framed as ever-shifting fields of power relations, differentiated by intersecting factors such as race, gender, and class. And so I tried in my research to locate the identities and work of the community librarians of color within this framework established by Abda Bra. All right, next slide, please. So ultimately, I wrote this dissertation, well, basically for my degree, but ultimately I wrote my piece of historical research intending it to be read as a letter to all librarian colleagues. And I have a hope that it will enable us to understand the past more deeply in order to navigate the presentation, in order to navigate the present and envision the future. My dissertation furthermore stimulates important questions that expand the horizons of critical librarianship research. I'm very ambitious. I contend that the future UK LIS research should incorporate the knowledge of Black British history, because I believe that it will provide a valuable platform for librarians to communicate and collaborate with a range of researchers, including historians and archivists, as well as scholars or practitioners in the fields of cultural studies, education, and sociology. It has been and will continue to be a challenging process, but the new information landscape that will emerge from this endeavor, I reassure, will be liberating and will create opportunities for rich conversations. So that was my presentation. Alice, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you, Sae. I'm doing a physical round of applause here, and I imagine everyone else is doing that virtually as well. And I'm just, before I start speaking, going to share in the chat that link that I missed at the beginning. Thank you, Darren, for helping me retrieve that. Is that the right one, Sae, for the event?
Oh, yes, yes,
yeah,
that's the one. Thank you.
Sorry, it was the one that I thought I had prepared earlier, but I had not. So thank you.
No worries.
So yes, so much to absorb and digest there. And I've seen some wonderful comments in the chat, which we will come to. But before we open up to the audience, Sae invited me to just share a brief response and a couple of questions to get the dialogue going. So we'll make sure that we have got time for everyone. Can I just have a reminder from Darren or Michelle the end time. You know, I get easily confused by time. If that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Our end time is 12:15. So we've got 35 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you. We need lots of time for this amazingly rich work that Sae is sharing with us, and I really look forward to seeing develop further. So thank you again, Sae, for such a compelling introduction to your research that I've had the privilege of reading the full dissertation and talking about this with you over the time we've known each other, and I've learned so much from you and the work you've been doing. Your work covers such a vital and valuable intervention into UK library historiography and UK Black British history as well, and for the global diaspora, of course. It's covering the overlooked contributions of community librarians of colour and Black librarians, not only through Dragon's Teeth, again, which is a publication I think not many people know about, but more broadly across the field as well. Your work powerfully challenges dominant narratives, colonial narratives, and information landscapes, offering a richly textured account of anti-racist activism within British librarianship, which has been around for decades. And I think it's so important for us to engage in these intergenerational lineages and struggles. So this is much needed in a field which largely whitewashes these histories. And your really nuanced and meticulous methodology, especially the archival work at the George Padmore Institute and the other archives you've engaged with and the hidden collections at UCL as well, demonstrates a really culturally conscious and culturally humble and ethical research practice and sensibility, which really demonstrates some of the integrity we were talking about in yesterday's panel. So yeah, this resonates really strongly with my own work and with, I think, the work of many of the people attending this conference, particularly around efforts to liberate archival memory and decolonize knowledge production in libraries and cultural institutions. And so important, as you do, to sort of center the marginalized voices and lived experiences in the professional and historical imaginaries and spaces, or diaspora spaces, to use Bra's term. So that's something I think you role model really well, and which I aspire to in my own work as well. So thank you. I could say so much more, but well, let's just start with, I'm going to just ask two questions, and I have run these past Sae before, so no surprises here. The first one is considering broadly the notion of intersectionality in practice. We can also think about the colonial matrix of power that we touched on yesterday regarding being, knowledge, and power. So your findings expose intersectional forms of racism within the library sector during the 1970s and 80s in Britain. I think it's so important to sort of have the historical lens that you do on that, but as you know, the past is also in the present. So I'm wondering what parallels you see in your experience of today in librarianship, and how might your research help inform more intersectional approaches to decolonization and EDI work in libraries today?
Thank you, Alice, for your response. Great feedback and question. It's interesting, and I find it important to open our conversation with this first one. I need to reframe your question a bit in order to answer it, though. And I'll try to be as honest and constructive as I can. First of all, I'd like to emphasize throughout my research, my primary goal was to foreground the work of UK-based ethnic minority librarians between the 1970s and 1980s who were involved in anti-racist activism. However, the level of their involvement seems to have been quite varied. So in the primary literature search process, I was trying to find as many details of their work as possible, keeping my focus on the narratives of these librarians of color. Now, the byproduct, not the main purpose, but the byproduct of this literature search was for me to realize how unsafe these ethnic minority librarians might have felt in their workplaces. The publications which I examined were by no means confidential documents or anything of that sort. They were ordinary professional journals widely read among librarians. When I saw the explicit racism and sexism expressed in some of these publications, especially those from the 1970s, the experience really shook my trust in librarianship. But at the same time, it helped me to much more profoundly understand how brave these past generations of librarians of color were. And it's also important to note that many of them were women. So under the pressure of all of this, that is intersectionality and power imbalance and the deep-rooted culture of fear, they kept questioning and challenging the status quo. It's amazing. Here, I'd like to share a quote from a text by a Black community librarian, and her name is Verena Thompson. So she wrote in 1991 in one of her articles describing the work expectations for community librarians. And I'm going to put the reference into the chat. Yeah, that's the one. So here goes. Wanted, Exploitation and Discrimination Ltd. We seek a librarian, no qualifications needed, who is fluent in both spoken and written insert languages. Our existing staff only speak their own, knowledge of adult and children's literature from the region and sources within the UK, ability to document the entire history of the race in the form of training in less than 1 hour. Knowledge of all music forms and formats from which and in which music originating from the region, etc., etc. Knowledge of methods of retrieval and classification, translation and transliteration, really no qualifications. Ability to program cultural activities, music and food, or food and music, and above all, have direct knowledge and experience of the community concerned. That is, you must be Black, but we can't say that. If this sounds like an exciting challenge and you are prepared to accept scale 5 and 6, then you are the person we are looking for. The above may be somewhat exaggerated, but examination of the advertisements placed during these heady days expected these duties to be performed by one lead officer. So that's the quote. I can say Verena's passage is one of the most remarkable, powerful quotes I included in my dissertation. So in this context, my discussion of offensive images and text is really intended to pave the way, leading to a deeper understanding of the struggles experienced by the librarians such as Anne, Jasvinder, Ziggy, and Verena, rather than to simply expose the shameful hidden history of British librarianship. And equally, I did not write my dissertation to make the voices of Anne and the others immediately useful for the current EDI and decolonization initiatives. And I think my intention is the other way around. I would like those currently committed to EDI and decolonization to think about how they could use their power for these past generations of librarians who did so much work before us and deserve much more recognition than they have so far been given. So starting from there, I want us to think really hard about what it means for us to continue to work on EDI and decolonization, especially within the UK, if this history remains forgotten and their voices are left unheard. So with these thoughts in mind, the question whether I see parallels between the present and the past, I find quite tricky, to be honest. As a historian, I don't think I can make direct comparisons. The times are different. Everyone's lived experience was and is different. Many aspects of UK society have changed over the past 50 years. That said, however, systemic inequity still persists. And if anyone reading my dissertation feels less alone because they can see themselves in the struggles and aspirations of Anne, Jasvinder, Ziggy, or any other librarians I discuss in the text, then I would say I've done a good job for this project. So that's my answer, Alice.
Amazing answer, Sae, thank you. I think that's just like a mic drop moment. Yeah, I really agree with everything you've said, and I think it's so powerful the way you urge us to not sort of think about the past and the present in this reductive or parallel way. The point needs to be about you know, how we are committed now, and why those histories have been erased are part of the problem now rather than something to compare, as you say. Yeah, so much to think about there, especially in times where, you know, currently what we're seeing with the rise of fascism and racism, and Keir Starmer echoing Enoch Powell. No, let's not go there, but you know, there's a lot of I think what Walter Rodney called, you know, the present is history, or history is present. So yeah, lots to think about there with time. So that takes me to my next question, before we open up to the audience, and that's developing this theme of collective memory and accountability and professional history. So you mention in your work that in contrast to the US, the UK lacks a shared historical narrative around anti-racist library work, something that your work does so much to address. So I'm wondering, what do you think are the barriers to creating such a collective memory in the UK library sector, and what role might LIS education and/or professional bodies play in changing that?
Yes, Alice, thank you. It's an again interesting question as well. So it was back in 2020, 5 years ago. I was working on my UCL coursework and reading critical librarianship publications from North America, not just US, but Canada as well. And most of them were published by Library Juice Press. Topography of whiteness, reference librarianship and justice. I remember borrowing these titles from the library, which led me later to explore the works by Todd Homma, Nicole Cook, Gina Schlesselman-Tarango, and David James Hudson. I also learned that there is a body of historical studies in the US examining racially segregated libraries. Further than that, I do not think I know well enough about the US library history to more clearly say that there is a shared historical narrative around anti-racist library work. But I am able to say that there is space in North America where conversations on current library issues incorporate historical perspectives, like this one, where for Bazi Etta, she's the person who coined the term vocational all. Sophia Leung is the co-editor of Knowledge, what was the book? Knowledge Justice. And Jen Brown, she's one of the co-founders of the space for librarians of color, We Here. And they were invited to speak at this session. And they talk both about the present and its connections to the past. So in 2020, specifically compared to what I read about the history of British librarianship at that time, I clearly felt that there were and still are richer insights in the critical librarianship publications from North America, which inspired me to come up with my research questions. Regarding your question on the barriers, I think the barriers in the UK come down to the peripheral position of history within the library and information studies. And on the other hand, there's also this peripheral position of librarians within the research of Black British history. Black British history, as far as I have researched, they have a stronger focus on artists, activists, or intellectuals. Librarians do not have a prominent position there. So within this gap, stories of Anne and Ziggy fall from the picture, despite the fact that both women were in close contact with well-known Black activists such as John La Rose and Eric and Jessica Huntley. Re-evaluation work for librarians such as Anne, Jasvinder, Ziggy, and Verena has not yet begun. And in doing this work, I believe that there is an important role to play for professional bodies and library schools. So in the conclusion of my dissertation, I outlined the need as well as the challenge to approach these past generations of librarians. The library workers working during the 1970s and 1980s are at least in their 60s. Many of them are probably in their 70s or older, and they must have left or retired from their library jobs. And maybe some of them are ill or even have passed away. So there is an acute question to ask: would it be possible to find where these librarians are and ask them about their life histories with a focus on the career and migration? And it sounds like an attractive and necessary project, but there are various sensitive factors such as their current age and life situations, as well as the trauma of racism they may have experienced. In many ways, this potential project is too big, I think, for one researcher to develop, and it involves complex work around and reconciling the past with the present. So if there will be such a project in the future, I think it must be fully supported by library schools as well as by professional bodies, and it must be carried out with the utmost respect paid to the past generations of librarians and with the utmost care and sensitivity to provide them with safe space. Yes, safety is most important. So that's my answer.
Amazing. Thank you, Sae. Another phenomenal answer. You are so eloquent and powerful on these topics. So thank you. There's so much I would just love to pick up on and respond to there, but I have had enough airspace. I just want to briefly mention that there were some great resources in yesterday's session by Twana and Abigail, I believe, on trauma-informed approaches to this kind of work. So hopefully those links will be shared around at some point. And I fully agree with your point about the need for investment and coordinated approach to oral histories and etc. around that. And I'm going to do what I can in my position to try and take that forward with others. Okay, enough from me. There have been another round of applause for Sae virtually. I'm sure everyone's clapping. Thank you so much. So I think I've picked up 3 questions so far, but there may be more. So bear with me while I keep looking at the chat. And sorry,
Darren, so this is the end of the recording. If you could stop it, that would be great.
Thank you for that
sure,
reminder.
I'll do that now.